Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Heart Mountain 2021 pilgrimage. Want to thank everybody who's here in person, but also everybody watching us live online right now. Um, we wanted to take this time. First of all, let me introduce myself again for those who are just tuning in. I'm the executive director of the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation, Dakota Russell. And we wanted to take this opportunity to talk about two very exciting projects that we've had going on for the past couple of years at Heart Mountain: the restoration of the Heart Mountain original root cellar and the barrack that we moved back to the site. And so we're going to get into a little bit about what we've done with each of those projects and a little bit about where we're going. But first, I wanted to introduce my co-host today, our member of our board of directors and chair of the Heart Mountain Facilities Committee, Chris Oriucci.
Thanks, Dakota. And my day job is that I'm a landscape architect in Massachusetts. And one of the most important projects that we've had the chance to work on was the design of the 9/11 Memorial Park at Logan Airport. And it was the site of where the two planes left on that tragic day. And what I learned from that project was a number of things. The power of design as it relates to place, as it relates to memory, and I think most importantly, as it relates to healing. And for the last 10 years, I've had the opportunity to work on the foundation here with an extraordinary group of people. And also spend time here with my father, Katz Horiucci. The Horiucci family was incarcerated here during World War II. And I think during the times I've had the chance to be here with him, it really became important to me to understand how those three items, the power of place, the power of memory, and the power of healing, can be, so important in what we do here as it relates to design of our various projects. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about how the progress that we're making. They've been in the works for many years. And we'll start out first on the root cellar. And we're going to start with a video that the staff has put together.
One of the criteria that the government used when choosing the locations of the camp was that it had to be on or near an area that had the potential for agriculture. The idea was that the Japanese Americans would grow their own food and help to feed themselves rather than putting additional pressure on the Army's supply system at a time when there was a great deal of rationing and a war going on. The problem is, because most of the good land had been taken up during the push to settle the frontier, potential for agriculture did not mean agriculture ready. So each of the areas where the camps were located, well, there was a reason that they weren't settled to begin with. In the case of Heart Mountain, a major problem was water. Heart Mountain is located in the high desert. This is normally sagebrush desert territory. And so in order to farm here, irrigation was needed. The CCC had been working on an irrigation canal, but when they disbanded, when the war started, it wasn't quite finished. So the Japanese Americans were responsible for finishing digging the canal and then waterproofing it all the way up to the dam so that the water would flow smoothly to the fields here in the Heart Mountain area. Another issue that they faced was soil conditions. The soil here is not always the best for farming. Luckily, they had a number of experienced soil scientists, most notably James Ito, who went out, took soil samples, and then sent them back to labs to figure out exactly what was going on with the soil. After that, they got their hands on every kind of seed that they could find, and then carefully matched the different types of seeds to the different types of soil, with the hopes that they would find different plants that grew very well in the different areas. The other problem that they faced was the climate itself, more specifically the growing season. Heart Mountain has a very short growing season, only about 90 to 100 days. And so, one of the keys to success in agriculture here at Heart Mountain was a group of farmers who actually weren't supposed to be here. There is a community of Japanese American farmers in the Yakima Valley who had been originally sent to Minidoka, but they ended up getting transferred to Heart Mountain, and they brought with them the expertise and special techniques needed in order to extend the growing season so that plants would have that much longer to mature before they had to be harvested quickly ahead of the early fall frosts. And they succeeded. They succeeded spectacularly. In fact, they succeeded so well that the small cellar that the Army had built as part of the camp was nowhere near big enough. And so the Japanese Americans designed and built 2 massive root cellars in order to store all of the produce that they had been producing. We are standing in one of those root cellars. It is still mostly intact. And the interesting thing about these root cellars is that they were the only buildings in the Heart Mountain camp that were completely, from start to finish, designed and built by the Japanese Americans themselves. They ended up taking over a sawmill in the local area in order to get the lumber they needed because it wasn't available for sale. And you can see the shortage of lumber by looking at the columns here, many of which still have bark on them, and some of which even have small damaged spots where they were damaged in transit or during processing, but had to be used anyways. This root cellar is also massive. It has 30,000 cubic feet of storage space. And it runs about 300 feet long and 35 feet wide. In fact, it was designed so that this central corridor where I'm standing, so that you could drive a truck into the entrance of it, drive it straight down, drop off your cargo, and then drive the truck out the other end. There was another root cellar. Unfortunately, that one collapsed in the 1950s, but this one is still standing. And we are currently in the process of actually restoring this cellar to its original condition, because this building is really a very unique and important structure in telling the story of agriculture, farming, and how people manage to make lives for themselves here at Heart Mountain.
All right. So, as Callie really emphasizes in that film, the cellar is an incredibly unique structure. You know, I have worked in historic sites for close to 20 years now, and I've never seen anything like it. You know, I always joke that when I came up here, I was coming from a small farmstead in Missouri that we were restoring from the 1800s, and I said, sure, I've restored a root cellar before, only to realize that this one was not 10 feet deep. It was 300 feet in there. And it really is a massive undertaking. If you can imagine the work that it took to even build it. Kamiko, can we bring up the slide of some of the historic photographs there? Thanks. So as you saw in the film, you see the truck driving out of it. What you don't understand is the huge hole that they had to dig with exactly one excavator. Everything else was done with hand tools. All of these timbers had to be harvested, run through the sawmill, and then hauled all the way back to Heart Mountain. All of this was incarcerate labor that was making this happen, and following their own design and adapting it. And it really makes it the only structure that we have left that has such a unique connection to the people that actually live at Heart Mountain. And of course, the story of our agriculture at Heart Mountain is so important too, because it was a community-wide effort to make sure that the camp was fed. The other two pictures you see here, the one on the bottom is Aichi Sakawe, who is taking inventory of potatoes. He was a statistician at heart that was at one of the heads of the farm program there. And he was very deliberate in his calculations, making sure that they were keeping enough food down here to bring the entire community at Heart Mountain through a long winter. And you can see up top the women who are actually rubbing eyes off of potatoes in the middle of the winter there to make sure that they don't go to seed down there in the cellar. And really, this all depended on volunteers. From block to block, they would ask for volunteers to come and participate in the farming effort. And so it's just part of the story that makes this cellar such a special building there. So we set out to begin on restoring this in 2018. Kamiko, if you can slide on ahead. Thank you. So our first effort at restoring this, we knew that we didn't have a huge amount of funds to work with. And so we wanted to really kind of run a test and make sure of our idea of how this would go about being restored. As you can imagine, there's a lot of challenges here. The underground nature of it means that it is getting pressure from the top, where there is pressure on the roof from all the earth that's piled up on there, and it's getting pressure on the sides as well from the earth trying to come in from the sides there. And so there are a lot of forces at work in here. And so the biggest part of what we did was just to test how we might jack the members of the cellar up there. So you can see that we've got a jack in place that's actually working on a roof joist right there to where it is pushing it upward. And this is a very slow process. You know, we go inch by inch, making sure that each time we jack it up, we are not damaging the cellar in some other place there. But obviously another part of it was uncovering all of the earth off the roof, as you see in another picture, then going in and replacing timbers that had been broken or rotted out within it as well. We were able to do about 30 foot of the overall cellar, so about a tenth of what we needed to do. Fortunately, we are coming back to work on it and do more. Can we move on to the next slide there? There you can see at the end of our project a little hard hat tour that we did for locals. Move on to the next one there. So the next challenge that we've got laying ahead of us that we are going to be working on this summer is to really restore this entrance that we have right here. And this is a challenging part of it because this is also going to be our main entrance for visitors to come down in the cellar. So it needs to be accessible to everybody, which means adding some improvements to it that were not originally there, but trying to make them as invisible as we possibly can so that it doesn't affect the overall power of the cellar as a structure when you first look on it there. So we'll be jumping in on this structure with another grant from the National Park Service. You can move on ahead with the slide. We are in the process right now of preparing the plans to get started, hopefully jumping in within the next month to start on restoring the entrance here and then to work some more in the interior as well. And then that'll continue on to next summer as well. This is made possible by a grant from the National Park Service Japanese American Confinement Sites Program, which actually is providing $425,000 for this project. And then a gift from the Aratani Foundation in the amount of $750,000 to continue that work and complete our work in the cellar. So it's really through some benefactors that have been very, very generous to us and recognize the importance of saving the structure that we've been able to make it through. All of that tells you what we've done, what we're doing. I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk about what all this means and what it's going to look like for our visitors when we're done.
Sure. Well, as Dakota said, the construction of this during World War II was an ambitious project. In 2021, it's an equally ambitious project. And, we've got a great team, involved here. It needs to be, we want to build this to last. It needs to meet current building codes. And that means everything from handicap accessibility to emergency fire exits, things that, just didn't come into play in 1945. So what we have here is a great team of architects and engineers. Dakota and I have just finished reviewing the final draft of the construction documents, and we're looking forward again to starting construction this year. Maybe the next slide, please. So once we get to the point of getting our first phase of construction completed, we're very excited to be working on the interpretation of this. How are we actually going to bring visitors down to learn about this? And we're working with Split Rock Studios, the designers that we worked with on the exhibits for the initial museum in 2011. And we're excited, to be working with them on this. And one of the things about this is that it's an epic structure as it is. Okay, it's really interesting and fascinating. But what's really important to us, in thinking about our campus of here at Heart Mountain, is how the root cellar is integrated into the overall experience of being here, and also the overall experience of what the root cellar was to people who lived here during camp life. So the idea of an interpretive trail that takes, I think we go to the next exhibit, interpretive trail that takes us from the camp through the agricultural fields to the root cellar itself. And I'm going to call it a bit of a journey, but the idea of once people get into the root cellar, that they are able to see the volume of the space, some of the great things that Kelly talked about, but also understand, the lessons, okay, that we have here. Everything from the transformation of this arid mountain desert to this incredibly fertile agricultural field and its production. But I think the other thing is, the idea of how we can actually immerse people in the experience, the power of place, as I talked about before, of actually having people here in the root cellar to see, to smell, to understand the volume of this is something we're very excited, to be able to do. And it's not just kind of like a static, again, experience. It's one that's really immersive. And Split Rock has had some really great creative ideas of how we're going to do that. So you can see some examples of how we might be able to get people into it. Maybe it's not, a great idea to have them actually, physically touching things, but the idea of working along perhaps a boardwalk type experience where they're able to see individual experiences and learn about what this was.
As Chris says, that's very important and key to us, is this ability to have our visitors move through the cellar and experience it and pick up those parts of the journey along the way, but also to work toward the preservation of the cellar, to balance that ability to have that kind of access with the sort of preservation we need. And so I really think they've worked out some very innovative ideas for how we'll get that done. And they've gone back and looked at these ancient structures in Greece and Egypt, and how people move through these places while still preserving them. And it was kind of completely off the wall from what I was thinking, because I had never gone that far with it. But once Chris and I saw it, I think it immediately dawned on us both that this was just a great approach to sort of guide their journey through the cellar. So we're really excited about that. Another project, which you see up on the screen here, that we're really excited about is we just received another Japanese American confinement site grant from the National Park Service to produce a documentary about the story of the root cellar and its restoration. And so as we're working this summer, we'll have Preston Randolph, who many of you were at the Return to Fort Hopp's Father or watched it online last night, made the documentary about Grant Bulltail most recently, is now coming on board to make the documentary about the root cellar as well. So that'll be another great interpretive tool for us to use to tell the story to audiences, not just here in Wyoming, but all over through this. So let's pivot just a little bit and talk about the work we're doing on the Barrack and its story. So if we could go ahead and start with the Barrack film.
So here we have an original barrack from the Heart Mountain Relocation Center. After the camp closed, most of the barracks were sold off to homesteaders, but this particular barrack was sold to the city of Shell, Wyoming. While it was there, it was used as a field school for geologists at the University of Wyoming, and it was recently returned to the museum so we could use it as event space and for interpretive space, so visitors will be able to walk in and see what a barrack actually looked like. So the Heart Mountain Barracks were constructed like military housing. It wasn't built with families in mind, and you can see that when you look at the building itself. So they used new wood, and instead of drying out the wood and treating it before building the barracks, they just put it together. So after they were built and the wood dried, it created spaces between the panels. You can also see nails sticking out from the walls. That's because they didn't take time to go in and put in insulation or anything. And the only other thing that was used to construct barracks other than the wood and the nails is tar paper. So there wasn't a whole lot of insulation, which became a problem when families moved here. So in the summer, the barracks were really hot and stuffy and dusty, and in the winter, it was really cold and hard to keep them warm. In addition to keeping out the elements, sound also traveled really easily. So all of the barracks buildings were divided into 6 different apartments, and families had to live there with their mom, their dad, brothers, sisters, grandmas, all in one small room. And sound traveled easily, so barracks were usually really loud. After families had been here for a few months, the government provided Cellar to help with the insulation, and that kind of helped to keep the cold out during the winter and the heat out during the summer, but it wasn't much better. Eventually, people found scrap lumber around camp and they used it to kind of insulate the space and build additional furniture. Living in the barracks wasn't very nice, and they weren't provided with a lot.
Graybull, Wyoming, after the war. And then it was in the 1960s moved over to Shell, Wyoming. So it had to come about 80 miles back to Heart Mountain. And we moved it back in 3 pieces, just the same as it had left camp. And finally, we're able to sit it on our historic site now. Next slide. And from there, we started to restore it back to its original appearance in the 1940s. This has been a challenging effort, and Chris can speak to this too, as we try and figure out how to restore something, but to do it in a better way that's going to hold up for much longer than it was meant to hold up there. And so the restoration has been a bit of a challenge, but we knew all along that we wanted to create a couple of different spaces within here. And actually, if we move to the next slide, we can see a little bit of what the interior looked like when we got it. It had mostly been kind of gutted. Had the partitions were gone for the most part. It had been remodeled somewhat. And so we really knew that we had opportunities here. First, the possibility of recreating actual living spaces, which I'm going to let Chris talk a little bit about in a second. But we also had another of what we might do, which is to create sort of a half building, so 60 feet by 20 feet within the building, that we could use as a classroom space, as an exhibit space, as an event space. And you can see, if you go to the next slide here, we have already actually had some events within the barrack. This is a concert that Nono Boy and Kishibashi performed in the Barrack a few years back. And it was a really moving experience to be inside of there. As it happened right as the weather was starting to turn cold. And so we were all chilly inside of there. We could feel the wind blowing against the walls as the concert was going on. But it sort of did create a sense of community within that building. Once they started playing, we all kind of huddled together for warmth. And it was really special experience. And so there is power in these buildings. And I'm hoping that we can use this larger portion that we have left open as sort of this classroom event space for these kind of programs in the future, be it film screenings, be it concerts, be it other types of gatherings there. And so you'll see, if you go to the next slide, a little bit about how we've got the Barrack laid out now. So you can see there on the right-hand side, the open space, and then the 3 units right there. I should say here that we have had a lot of benefactors that have helped out with this project as well. The moving of the Barrack back from Shell would not have been possible without the several grantors, but most prominently the Episcopal Diocese Foundation of Wyoming, which helped us in a big way to make this project happen. And then the exhibits, the panels about the history of the barracks that are going to go up in that big space are provided through a certified local government grant from our local historic preservation commission as well. So that's pretty fantastic. We also just learned that we've received a National Park Service Japanese American Confinement Sites grant to continue our restoration and recreate those living spaces. And I'm going to let Chris talk a little bit about what we're doing there.
Right. Well, it's so great to have these opportunities. And again, we've talked about the Power Place and all of that. And I think it's been great to finally have this building, I'm going to say structurally stabilized, something that we're working towards with the root cellar. But now that it is, we now have the opportunity to do, I'm going to call like the fun stuff. And so you can see on the right, that is our event space, our classroom space, our exhibit space, our performance space. But what's going to be really special is on the right side, you'll see the 3 unit types. And originally there were 6, A, B, C, D, E, and F. So we have A, B, and C. And they're each very unique. There's the end unit, there's B, and then there's C. My family was in unit C and D, I believe. But anyway, we're really looking forward to, the opportunity to interpret these 3 units. And so our first unit is going to be Unit B, and we're working very closely with Bacon Sakatani on his recreating his family's barrack. Bacon Sakatani is, a committed foundation member, reunion organizer in Los Angeles, and tireless. He was instrumental in the moving of the Heart Mountain Barrack to the Japanese American National Museum in Little Tokyo. And we feel it's just more than appropriate to have his family recognized here at our barrack. He has an encyclopedic memory of items. One of his childhood at Heart Mountain, but specifically of the items that were in his family's barrack. And so we have been going through the list and making sure that we have these items available. Thankfully, Bacon has actually built some of these items, which were done from like scrap lumber. So things like I think there was a bench and a table, which we received. And we're also, looking to him to also inform other things, basic things like the chamba, which I didn't know about that, but that is Japanese American for chamber pot. Some very basic things, but also things that his balsa airplane and slingshot. Just really important, memorable elements that are personal. And again, I think that what's important about what we do in the barrack, like we do in so many other cases where we have the opportunity. Again, these are not static, exhibits. These are things which are told in the first person, so that when somebody comes here, they are learning a story, a very personal story. And so we're very excited about working with Bacon on recreating his family's experience here.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's fantastic about this, any of you who've been to the Interpretive Center know that we've sort of recreated two rooms as best we can within the museum there that sort of represent the generic before and after. But it's really exciting to be working with individuals and talking about their stories. And so you'll go into these rooms and feel a very immediate connection. And we're working on ways that the narration to these rooms will be these individuals themselves. Whether that's through you go in and you turn on a 1940s radio and Bacon's voice comes out and tells you about the room you're in, or whether it's narrating through text panels that are within the room itself, to sort of highlight not only the spaces that were experienced by everyone, and like the cold and the wind that everyone experienced, but highlight these personal moments. Just as Chris is excited about the slingshot and balsa wood glider, I am excited about the undertaking of Bacon's father's underground sake distillery, and how we're going to be able to represent this within the room as it was in the 1940s there. So we do have some very, very exciting stories that are coming out of this process. You want me to talk a little bit about the A room and
Sure.
Nyogen Senzaki? Sure. So if you can advance to the next slide there. So we also wanted to meet the challenge of having an Issei voice within the Barrack as well, since sometimes their experiences get lost because they're not here to speak for themselves. And so we tried to figure out how we could potentially do this. And obviously, it was going to have to come from an Issei who left a lot of reflection on their time in camp, and whose room we could get a reasonable approximation of. And so we landed with Nyogen Senzaki, Reverend Nyogen Senzaki there, who was the prominent teacher of Zen within the camp, and is actually credited by many with being the first one to really bring Zen to North America, to the United States. And so while he was within Heart Mountain, he created what he called his Wyoming Zendo. Essentially, he took this meager living space that he had been given, which was one of the smaller rooms there. And in addition to having his sort of monk cell within there, he devoted most of the space to making it a meditation hall and inviting others over there to study Zen. And here you see a drawing by his friend Estella Shigo of him sitting in his Wyoming Zendo and teaching a class. But what's marvelous about Nyogen Senzaki is that through his whole time at Heart Mountain, he wrote letters, he wrote prose, he wrote poems describing his experience and what it was like. And so we have, in addition to sort of this picture of his room here, we also have these sort of rich textual sources that we can draw from of him describing his room and describing his life at Heart Mountain. And so in that way, even though he's no longer with us, we still have his voice and can recreate his room using that. And so we're really excited about the possibilities of that, not just with it for day-to-day visitors, but we've already had Zen groups who have visited the site who have asked, well, will you allow us to meditate in there? Will you allow us to use it for its intended purposes? And I absolutely can't see why not. I think that would be a fantastic extension of what it's going to be, but we're working to get the little details of it right, and really establish the space as something that'll tell a unique story that you don't always hear about. So we're very excited about that as well. And Chris, do you kind of want to wrap up, give a bigger sense of what these projects mean to Heart Mountain?
Well, I think they are all, they're pieces. And, what I have really come to understand is that it's a story, and it's a story that has many chapters, many players, many people. And what's really, meaningful about what we're doing here is, we weren't set on just doing the museum. Our reach and our breadth and our understanding of the site and the experience is really going to come from the development of each of these places and how we can interpret them as an overall experience. So stay tuned. And for next year's pilgrimage, we're excited to be able to show more about more progress on these. So yeah, thank you.
So I know we have a few questions coming through online. Don't bother me if I'm looking at my phone. I'm not distracted. Julie's texting them to me. Um, but I also have, I'm sure we have some in the room. And so if you've got a question, if you want to just come up here to the mic, Chris will be happy to field it. All right. Well, while these folks here in the room are gathering their courage to step up, I'm going to turn it over to some of the questions that are coming off of the internet there. Do you have a long-range interpretive plan for these two structures?
Yeah. I mean, I think, we touched on that, with our sort of incremental steps on this, but
Yeah.
I think, as it relates to the root cellar, we're very fortunate to, be able to start these projects, with a good, financial, basis for doing that.
Yeah, very much
I think
so.
when we started doing this, it was, I wouldn't say it was a dream, but it was a vision. And, through the incredible generosity and the hard work of staff in generating grants, I think that we're gonna get there with the root cellar. And again, with the Barrack, these are I think we're going to be in good shape for next summer.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I think so, absolutely. I think we're going to be in good shape for a long, long time. We're designing these in a way that they are going to hold up to the elements, that these exhibits are being put in thoughtfully, that will last us a long time and go long range. But, another thing that I think that if you've heard me talk at all, you've heard me talk a lot about, is that this represents also a rethinking of what Heart Mountain is. We have been Heart Mountain Interpretive Center and confined within our four walls of the museum right there. But as we start adding the Barrack, as we start adding the root cellars, we hopefully start adding the hospital buildings and restoring those in the next couple of years. We're becoming much more of a historic site campus, and so that's that's making our leadership, and it's a discussion we often have in board meetings, as Chris can tell you, of, trying to start thinking about this as a whole, as a whole experience that's not just the interpretive center. But when you come out, you're likely by the end of this going to be spending a whole day at Heart Mountain and really soaking in some of these historic elements.
No, agreed.
So we got another question from online here. One moment. Sure. What was that? Oh, yes. Oh, it got up on the screen. Yeah. So how are survivors included in the planning process? And that's a great question. You want to field that a little bit first? I think we touched on it a little bit, but.
Well, again, so much of what we're doing here is about, the first person. And when we have the opportunities to be working with our Nisei, it's a great, learning opportunity. It's really important for us to make sure that their voices, their memories, are included in the process. We have several board members who are former incarcerees, so their voice and their wisdom and all is actively incorporated into all of our decision making.
Yeah, and this is really a challenging part of this. If you've been to the Interpretive Center, you know that when Chris says it's first person, she means it's literally the exhibit is in the first person. It talks about when we came here, what life was like for us within camp, and so we're looking to extend that even as we develop these 6 panels that are going to be in the large room that I showed you there. These 6 panels are really just describing the story of this barrack in particular, but also of the barracks in general as they come to camp, as they're constructed, what life was like inside of them, what happened to them after the war was over. But that first person extends there. And so as our staff was working on writing these, it's really important that we get a lot of input from former incarcerees on what that's like, because it's not our perspective. We can't say it, but we know that that voice is going to be assumed to be theirs. And we don't want to assume anything in doing that. And so there's a lot of back and forth with sort of our Nisei brain trust that we've developed to sort of get the wording right and say, okay, is this how you'd say this? Is this how you would describe this experience? Are we getting to the heart of what you would want people to know about life in a barrack? And so there is really, throughout the whole design process, a lot of back and forth. And we are so fortunate to have so many survivors from the camp that remain engaged and really like to talk about their experiences and like to make sure that we get it right. And that's so helpful in this process. Aura's got a question. Do you want to step up and ask it on the mic here, Aura?
So I have two questions. I don't want to hog all the time, but they popped in my head as I was sitting there. So one of them, to follow up on this theme of engaging Nisei to help you, make sure you get it right. I would love to hear a retelling of the story of how Bacon helped you figure out that the barrack was like kind of backwards and the doors were in the wrong place, and how you fixed it. And then also, I don't remember if you mentioned this, but if you could talk a little bit about how you're aiming to capture women's perspectives in interpretation for the barrack.
I'm wondering if you could start with the woman.
Oh, sure.
And then I'm also wondering if in the meantime we can queue up one of the plan images.
Sure. So that'd be the schematic of the barrack that you were looking at there. So as far as incorporating women's perspectives, that's something that we very much wanted to do. We look at, when we are developing these structures, as also an opportunity to do things that maybe we did not emphasize as much as we wanted to when we built the exhibits in the interpretive center. And so there's always a chance to be more inclusive and tell more different stories as you're going through this. And one of the things that we have realized is that a lot of our Nisei Brain Trust is male. And so we've got a very male experience. And so when we are working on that B room, and we're actually hopefully close to pinning down a candidate who's going to be willing to work with us on that. But we are looking for a female perspective specifically for the B room, and to be able to understand what it was like for, in this case, a young girl within the camp, and what her family life was like in there. And so that's important. I think it's something that we also feel like is very important in the Cellar story as well, because as I said, it takes a whole community to run this farm program. And so in many cases, women were working, like you see in the Cellar, they were harvesting. In many cases, because the men had gone out on seasonal leave where they could get better wages working out in the beet fields, harvesting sugar beets, the women were the ones who were driving the tractors around the farm, And so we want to make sure that we incorporate those stories as well. And that's one where, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of first-person narratives to build off of, but we do have a lot of accounts that we can draw from, and some photographic record of that.
So going back to the story of how resourceful our Nisei Brain Trust is, when we moved the shell barrack to the site, it came with 3 doors and one on the end. And so we oriented it in a way that the doors faced the interpretive center. It made circulation sense. We knew we were going to add a handicap access ramp on the right side. So all was going well. But in the meantime, Bacon, who is very, very familiar with the barracks because he took apart one to move down to Janum, and also just is a very detail-oriented person, recognized that there was something not quite right. And very wrong, very wrong. In fact, the word "it's wrong" came up to us many times and very clearly. And so what we learned is that when at some point in the process of it being used in shell, they actually changed the doors, and they changed the side that the doors were on. And so we did some further reconnaissance, and in fact, Bacon was correct. And the doors were actually originally on the opposite side. In this drawing, you'll see, this is the Meyer office, but there's some windows that needed to be redone in red, and the new ones are in blue. But that's all the result of Bacon's thoroughness in attention to detail. And, ultimately, serendipity, it's a much better project to have the doors face the road.
Yeah.
And so when people drive, past the interpretive center, they see that. I think that they really understand what this is about. So thank you, Bacon. And another example of how, fortunate it is we are to have these advisors.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one that it sounded so far out there, that my first thing was when he said, no, the doors and the windows are in the wrong place, and I should have just said, well, you remember. But I said, well, there are a handful of barracks that, were partitioned up a little differently, were built a little differently. And so I went back to the historical record and tried to inventory all of the different ones in the camp. And because he told me, no, I just think the doors have been closed in and moved to the other side. And I said, that defies all logic, Bacon. Why would they move 3 doors, close in 3 doors, and move 3 doors to the other side? When they just switch the building around? And he said, no, that's got to be what happened, because if you and so I went back, I went through all the historical record. I couldn't find one that matched it up. Yeah. And finally we went in, we did a deep dig, look behind the rafters at the changes in the behind the uh, studs rather, and looked at the changes in the wood, and they had hidden it especially well, even using old wood when they blocked in these doors. But sure enough, they had closed up 3 doors on one side and put 3 doors on another side. And yeah, it's a reminder to trust your niece. Just listen to your elders, as it was. um, so I have a note from Julie here that just says in all caps, Aaron's question. So Aaron, I don't have it actually. Oh, there it goes. Thank you. So she asked, what ways are there for younger generations to get involved with the preservation process?
Okay. Well, I can, as a mom, as a daughter, and as a mom. So as a daughter, here I am, right? But as a mom, I have 2 college-age kids, and I mean, it's about talking, and educating, and around the table, right? Um, so my kids have grown up learning about camp, and fortunately, they've also been able to spend a lot of time with my dad, and to the point where both of them have volunteered here at Heart Mountain. I was actually going to give a photo to Dakota to include of my son, who spent a summer here 2 years ago volunteering, all the way up from Massachusetts. But there's a picture of him in the barrack, and so I think again, I think it's a lot about telling the stories, Aaron, making sure that the stories stay alive in our families. And that's for descendants, but hopefully the reach, of what we're doing with the Meta Simpson Institute, a lot of our social media work, really trying to engage, the next generation. And frankly, I include you as part of that next generation. So.
Yeah, I would say the same. First off, I've got to talk about Peter, who interned with us one summer. That's when we got his photograph in the barrack there, and definitely has an architect's mind, because when he set out for his research project for us, he started looking at privacy in camp and thinking about public spaces versus private spaces and what went on in these 2 different kinds of spaces, and delivered a fascinating presentation that I need to bug him and make him follow up with an article. But it was a wonderful presentation on it, and so a great example of engagement there. And I think that as we move through it, it's something that we're looking for as much hands-on as we can too. We had a school group from the University of Nebraska Lincoln that actually came out for a spring break service. And when we were doing demolition work inside of the barrack to take off all of the things that had been added in the 60s, 70s, 80s, actually spent their spring break with me, crowbarring old pieces of barrack apart that had been added during its time at Iowa State University, and really doing some of this work as well. And then they would go in after spending a day doing this, and they would study Heart Mountain. They would read through the articles. They would watch the films and come to understand this through this service project. And so I think we are always open and looking for opportunities like that where we can engage the youth in that way. Another question that we had come through, I don't see it popping up on the screen yet, was about engagement. There we go. Was about engaging the local community in this project and the storytelling that surrounds it. And so I can speak to that a little bit. As part of this grant that we got from our local Historic Preservation Commission to create these 6 panels that will tell the story of the barrack that are going in the large room there. We also wanted to have a public component, and it's very important, these types of grants, that you do some public education with them. And so what we finally settled on was to start really making a serious effort to scientifically inventory the barracks that are still surviving in the Bighorn Basin. For those of you who don't know, after the camp closed, the government actually sold off all of these barracks in 1945 for $1 a piece to local community groups and to homesteaders that were moving into the area, that turned them into houses and sheds and barns. And there are many, many barracks that are still surviving within the immediate radius of Heart Mountain. And while there have been several projects over the years, the University of Wyoming American Studies program actually undertook one back in 2012, 2013 to work to identify these. None really was able to make a complete inventory of them. And so what we're working on now is a program that we're hosting workshops for volunteers from the community that want to come out and learn how to spot barracks as they see them, learn how to talk to the landowners about what they want to do, and learn how to go in and make assessments of these buildings to see what kind of condition they're in, how they've been changed over the years. And for the landowners that are willing to do so, we are actually putting pictures and an interactive map up that'll be going up on our website this fall, to where folks can actually see the barracks and where they have gotten to since their time in camp. And that's going to be a really fantastic part of it, because I think what we have realized is that, as we've been through this project, is that the barracks really are one of the ways that Heart Mountain's legacy is still felt within the local community, because so many that have no connection to the camp itself have a connection through these barracks themselves. And they can say, you know, I've met guys my age who have come in and said, you know, I grew up in a barracks, you know, that they're still being used and that they're still part of the community. It's a great way to engage people with the larger themes of the story. All right, I'm going to see if we have any last questions coming in. Yeah.
I was told to get in the screen, so I'm going to
Okay.
have to force my way through these 2 that are wearing the same shirt as I am.
Sure. I always look forward to answering a question with my boss standing over my shoulder.
I want to know, that root cellar is really amazing, and the power place is significant. What was the biggest challenge over the last several years in terms of restoration?
Oh man. You know, I think the hardest part for me, and this represents a big challenge, but it also represents an amazing opportunity, is that and maybe you have, Chris, I've never worked with anything like it. You know, I have worked with all manner of historic structures from all periods of American history in my career, and I have never been to something like this. There is no structure that compares to it. I've been in underground structures that are much, much smaller. I have been in above ground structures that are bigger and made of logs and everything, but this is such a combination of unique elements and unique craftsmanship, for that matter, that there really wasn't a template on how to do it out there. And so in a lot of ways, we had to come up with the ideas ourselves of, okay, how are we going to restore this piece of it? You know, how should this look when we're done? How do we want to move the audience through it and make them experience it in a way that we have, that's made us come to love it? You know, I think one of the things that's tricky is, to give an example. So the cellar, as it was deteriorating, cracks were starting to open in the roof. And while these were dangerous to the structure itself, and we couldn't just leave them there, they also allowed for the sunlight to stream into this underground structure and create this beautiful play of light down here. And so we realized pretty early on in the design process, that even though we needed to fix those places, that we couldn't just arrest it. There was no way for us to just arrest it and allow those to stay broken as they were. But we needed some way to simulate sort of that play of light. And so the interpretive plan that we're looking at, the exhibit plan that we're working on with Split Rock, is one that incorporates light in a big way.
Well, I think, one of the things about design is, when there are opportunities. And so I look at, the challenges of how do you support a sagging roof that's collapsing. But, I think that's a combination of things. It's some of the resourcefulness of just figuring this out, boots in the ground. But also, Dakota and I were just talking about some innovative ways that we might be able to reduce the roof load itself. And, thinking about, okay, it's 2021. We don't have to just use the technology that existed, and that there are some innovative ways, whether it's live roof, green roofs, engineered soils. So I'm excited about, taking, a complex issue, a challenge, and creating, a new opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the goal in this always, and this is the tricky part with the Barrack and the Cellar, is that you're looking at a structure that was built to last, the duration of the war. It was not built for a long, long time. And while I'll say the Cellar is pretty dang sturdy, and that's, again, the difference between Japanese American construction and government wage labor construction that built the barracks, is it's much sturdier and stronger. But the challenge with both of them is that nobody still intended these to be here and be in use in any way in 2021. And so we have to be innovative when we come up with solutions and work within the spirit of it, and work in a way that does not alter the historic appearance of it, does not alter the integrity, as we speak of in historic preservation a lot, but also, ensures that these buildings are going to last another lifetime, because we're not building them back to last 3 years this time. We're building them back to last for as long as we can make them last. All right. Well, I think that about wraps our time up. So I am going to throw things over to Denny for a final talk about our fundraising goals this weekend. So Denny, take it away.
Thanks, Dakota. I'm here, Denny Hirsch again, hi, with Doug Nelson, our vice chair of our board. And I just want him to help me reach out to all of our guests to talk about why he's engaged, why he feels this Minetta Simpson Institute at Heart Mountain will be so important, not only to the foundation, but to people around the world to learn how to get along a little better than we have been lately. So Doug, take it away.
Well, I guess I'd start with saying I've been a believer for a long time in the importance of what this place tells us, what its story is. And we've, over these last 11 years since we opened the Interpretive Center, had thousands of people come through and have their eyes opened, their lives changed, their perspectives changed. It is a powerful set of lessons that this place offers the country. And it's wonderful that we are able to host 20 or 30,000 people here who come to visit the museum and look at the site. But there are millions of Americans who need to know this story. Millions of Americans. There's no chance we are going to have the kind of attendance here that will make a difference in public understanding of the incarceration experience, the magnitude of the injustice, the extent of resilience that was shown by the Japanese American community, and the remarkable fact that Japanese Americans enduring this extraordinary hardship managed somehow to sustain a faith in this country and the faith in the future of this country, which I think is remarkable. So how do we make this story more accessible? And the Minetta Simpson Institute, I think, is our answer to it. We want to create a facility here that will allow us to invite groups, to create seminar space, to create classroom space, to do training of teachers, to do training of public servants, to do training of organizations, to allow conventions of organizations interested in social justice and in history. We don't have that space now, and we don't have also the capacity to do the kind of production facilities, production resources, podcasts, documentaries, the republication of written materials on Hart Mountain and on the incarceration. The Minetta Simpson Center is our effort to create an outreach capacity that makes the Hart Mountain story and really the Japanese-American World War II story available for people to learn from. The issue now is we want to build this in the spirit of the people we're naming this institute for. Alan Simpson and Norman Minetta have been friends of the foundation. They've enabled us to do a great deal here, but they've also represented the country a bipartisan, multiracial commitment to civil rights, to human rights, to social justice, and really to education. We want their legacy of patriotic public service to be the kind of value framework for developing educational materials for people across the country. We think this needs to happen. We think we have a unique opportunity to create that capability, and we think it's time also to give due recognition and honor to these extraordinary public servants, Norm Minetta and Alan Simpson. And to do this, while they can benefit and recognize the appreciation that it represents for what they've done, we need to move quickly to turn this idea into a reality. We hope to break ground a year from now. And we hope to cut ribbons and invite people to begin using this new facility at the following pilgrimage. To do that, we need everybody who believes in this foundation, who believes in the importance of this story, who believes in the importance of recognizing great men like Al Simpson and Norm Minetta, to help us get this done. We need to raise, in the short term, we need to raise $400,000 by the end of this summer, and we need to raise $2 million over the next 24 months following that. We need everybody who cares about Hart Mountain, everybody who has a stake in its success and sustainability and growth, to begin now to help us make that real and to make it possible. Our board has given 100% and generously, I should add. Our advisors have. Many of the people who are members have, but we need everybody now to make that extra special effort to enable us to do this successfully and expeditiously. So if you care about what we're trying to do and believe in the importance of America knowing and learning from this story, please contact us, make a contribution, make a pledge, do the best you can to further this along. I think it's a cause worth your investment. So please think about that now. And if you've already made an investment, please talk to friends and others who know and care about this subject to join you in supporting the Minetta Simpson Institute. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Doug. I just want to add that this will be our last plea on the internet today. Thank you for joining us during these sessions and learning more about Hart Mountain. and the foundation, and also learning a little bit about Minetta Simpson Institute. And go to our website, log in to learn more about Minetta Simpson as we put more up and on our website and post on Facebook. And please help us reach our goals over the next 2 years. We'll take monthly payments. I'm happy to work with anybody who's interested. My name and email and everything should be on our website as a staff member. I'm Denny Hirsch, Membership and Development Manager. So please reach out. Let me help you help us. Thanks.
Thank you.